My name is Decker Fraser. I was a global product marketing manager for Sony PlayStation. I was a product marketing manager for a Series D Google-backed startup. I was a vice president of marketing for a Google accelerator startup, and I was a senior product marketing manager for a Series A startup in San Francisco. I'm the author of 2 product marketing books, Become a Product Marketing Manager and Product Launch, How to Go to Market. I also have my MBA in marketing from the #1 ranked business school for marketing in the world, the Kellogg School of Management. This video is a free preview of my course. You can download that course using the link in the description. Let's get started.
Introduction. In 1943, a naval engineer named Richard T. James was stationed at Cramp Shipbuilding in Philadelphia and was tasked with designing the springs that would suspend delicate equipment on ships at sea, keeping them level in rough weather. As the story goes, he was experimenting with tension springs and dropped one. Hypnotized as the spring fell to the ground, Richard had an idea, and the Slinky was born. Of course, that's not the whole story. That's the story of how a helical spring became a toy, not how the Slinky, as a product, went on to sell over 300 million units before the year 2000. It is, in short, a story of invention. But for every product with an origin story, there's an equally compelling tale that doesn't get told. The story of how that product makes it to market. In this book, we're not going to teach you how to invent the next iPhone or Slinky. Our mission is basic. We're going to teach you exactly how to take a new product to market. Over the course of our careers, we have launched countless new products and features for companies large and small, including Sony PlayStation, Google-backed Rocket Lawyer, and multiple early and mid-stage venture-backed startups. We've also worked for agencies that have consulted for hundreds of small businesses on go-to-market strategies. This book teaches you how to apply the latest go-to-market tactics emerging from Silicon Valley, as well as the foundational strategic thinking from the Kellogg School of Management. We've broken the book into 7 sections outlined below, each one covering a key pillar of any go-to-market strategy. Within each section, we break each component into its foundational elements, cover tactical execution, and pull in examples from our experience taking products to market. Section 1. Target audience. Who are you trying to target? How do you identify and segment your target audience? How do you know if you're at product market fit? Section 2. Value propositions. Understanding core components of a value proposition, competitive advantage, positioning, unique selling proposition, and value. Calculating product value with math. Defining value propositions without math. Section 3. Messaging. 6-step progress for building your messaging framework. Copywriting. How to do it, plus 4 tips to do it well. Section 4. Go-to-market team. Who's involved in bringing a product to market? Choosing a team that suits your strategy. Defining success metrics for your team. Section 5. Demand generation. 2 models for demand generation, an example of a demand gen campaign, and 7 common demand gen tactics. Section 6. The marketing mix. Calculating the marketing mix. Building your marketing mix. Section 7. Price. The basics of value-based pricing, 4 common pricing tactics. By the end of this book, you'll understand exactly what you need to do to catapult yourself into the market and make your product the next Slinky. Part 1. Target audience. Who you target. This part of the book is all about the who of your go-to-market strategy, how to select your audience, what to look for in a good target audience, and how to link your audience to your overarching go-to-market goals. This chapter will cover how to set the business goal that your target audience is going to help you achieve, the role that supply and demand plays in target audience definition, common B2B and B2C segmentation tactics and strategies, how to size your market, and product or market fit. Before you select an audience, set a clear numeric goal. The big mistake managers make with going to market is jumping straight into the strategy without quantifying their desired outcome. The entire point of a strategy is that it's a means of achieving an objective. Without an objective, your go-to-market strategy is aimless. Starting with a strategy is a recipe for disaster. When I worked at Sony, I had identified the perfect target customer for a new product. It was a match made in heaven. The needs of the customer aligned perfectly with what the product delivered. The strategy was perfect, but there was just one huge problem. The customer segment was just too darn small. Even if I sold the product to every single member of that segment, it would barely have made a financial dent. You must have a goal, such as a clear financial objective, before you have a strategy. In my case, my goal required an imperfect strategy. That is, pursuing an imperfect target customer, because the goal was more important. Here are some examples of clear, quantified goals that will help dictate your strategy. Generate $15 million in 1 year, sell 100,000 units in 6 months, break even on development costs in 2 years, achieve 50% market share, grow brand awareness among segment B by 90%, grow purchase intent by 3% among segment A, grow net promoter score by 30% among current customers in segment B, generate $1 million in pipeline monthly recurring revenue, or MRR, generate 200 qualified sales leads per month. Example: one of the most effective ways of generating new leads is to be a guest speaker for an influential organization. I was reaching out to key organizations to schedule my CEO as a webinar speaker. This kind of marketing is very effective in building your company as an influential thought leader. The problem is that leads generated in this way can require a lot of nurturing before they are ready to buy. In the long term, such an approach makes sense. If your goal, however, is to generate X number of qualified leads this quarter, you shouldn't be wasting your time on high-level, long-term content marketing. Your company could be burning through cash so quickly that it simply cannot afford to invest in long-term tactics. Instead, the smarter course of action is to focus on existing leads and get them to the point where they are ready to speak to sales reps. That requires building content that is a bit more product-centric and that covers very specific pain points rather than high-level aspirations. Nothing will help you focus more than writing a clear numeric goal. You won't waste time on inconsequential tactics. You won't choose a target segment that is too small or too large. You will make smarter decisions on how to allocate your marketing budget. You'll be able to hone in on the partners who will matter most. And you'll know what marketing budget to request. There's a reason you created this product, so it shouldn't be that hard to write down an objective. If you're working at a tiny company, your goal might be to retire off the proceeds from this product. In that case, just put down $3 million profit as the objective. That way you don't waste your time dealing with tiny markets and tiny marketing tactics. If you work for a large company, your goal might be to generate $100 million in revenue or to acquire 1 million users without any clear financial target. Just ask yourself one question: how will I know this product was a success or not? Remember, if you're not the founder or CEO of the organization, make sure whatever goal you set aligns to the goal of the business. In larger organizations, the goal of the new product will be in part defined by the organization's needs. The number one way to do this is to ask what metrics are discussed in board meetings. What needles are the board of directors looking at, and how will your product help move them? That's the best thing you can do to guarantee business alignment. Pick your target customer. I've worked with lots of companies that invested heavily in products only to see them fail miserably when they went to market. When it fails, people start playing the blame game. Our PR agent wasn't very good. We didn't have the same features as our competitor. Google Ads was a wasted investment. Onboarding was too slow and error-prone. Another product released at the same time. The list is endless. But in reality, these are symptoms of a failed strategy rather than causes of the failed launch. Strategic mistakes cascade through everything, and usually a poor strategic decision results in tactics that don't work no matter what your budget. And the first strategic decision that usually gets made is choosing a target customer. If you choose the right customer, then you have a larger margin for error when it comes to executing your campaign. With that in mind, here's how you pick the right target customer. Estimate supply and demand. You need to select a target customer or market that has enough demand to achieve your desired outcome. This is a surprisingly common mistake, so let's break it down a little into the common traps we see. Scenario 1. No demand. First, you have a product where there truly is not enough demand to support the primary goal. For example, let's say you're launching a new pet insurance product specifically for retired racing greyhounds. Great! That's a super niche audience, which means you can probably create a value proposition and messaging that's hyper-relevant to your target customers. But let's say there are 2 million retired greyhounds out there, and you need 4 million to achieve profitability. While your product might be great, there just isn't enough demand there to make the product work. If you're in this bucket, then you need to pivot to serve a larger target audience. Scenario 2. No demand yet. This is all too common in the world of technology. An entrepreneur identifies a problem and thinks, I can fix this. Currently, there's no market for their solution, but the potential market is huge and they're going to crack it wide open. This is called category creation, and if executed correctly, it can be extremely effective. Since you're all alone in the market, you tend to get first mover advantage and all the perks that come with that, including brand awareness, thought leadership, and zero competitors. However, category creation is extremely difficult. There are years of zero or no profit in revenue, and you are usually required to spend huge sums of money on demand creation. That is, educating people about the problem you've identified, creating a demand for your solution. Only then can you start the process of demand generation and start to see returns on your marketing spend. More importantly, category creation is a long-haul play. And if your product isn't sufficiently unique, you may find that your years of creating demand can be stolen by a newer, faster-moving competitor who swoops in once you've done the hard yards of category creation. Scenario 3. A lot of demand, but a lot more supply. Another big mistake would be selling something that is oversupplied. If you market something that doesn't provide much superior value over similar products on the market, then you're doomed to failure. This is why measuring supply is an important step in planning your go-to-market strategy. Example. One of the biggest mistakes new Amazon sellers make is choosing overly niche products that generate minuscule revenue. A smarter approach would be to look at what is already selling well, using data from a resource such as Jungle Scout, and improve upon deficiencies that appear in product reviews. Example. Publishers have the very difficult task of trying to estimate how well a new book, video game, movie, or similar product will perform in the market. This is particularly important because the bulk of the marketing budget is spent in one very narrow window of time. The way they overcome this challenge is by using comps, or comparable products, to see how well they perform historically. If you are selling a new product, look at how well similar products have done in the past to estimate demand. There are various ways to estimate demand and supply. Look at how well comparable products are selling using tools such as Jungle Scout or your own historical records. Use Google Keyword Planner to see how many people are searching for a solution to the problem you sell. Google Trends can help if you expect demand to grow or shrink. And some marketplaces such as Udemy will provide tools that give an estimate of both demand and supply. Identify your target market. More goes into picking a market than just making sure you have enough supply. Usually when marketers talk about target markets, what they're really thinking about are target customers. But this isn't quite accurate because markets include more than just customers. Imagine for a moment a physical marketplace, a place where people go to buy vegetables, clothing, and tools. There aren't just customers in that market, it is an entire ecosystem of buyers and sellers. Focusing only on customers will get you into trouble. Airbnb, for example, cannot just focus on its target customers. It must also create value for the many people who rent out their homes. That is, it must also focus on the sellers in the marketplace. Otherwise, the entire two-sided market would fall apart and their marketing strategy would be unsustainable. A given target market actually consists of 5 components known as the 5 C's. 1. Customers. Who are you selling to? What problem do they have? 2. Company. In other words, your company. How do you solve your customers' problems? Where can you solve it better than the status quo or current solutions? Where can you solve it better than the status quo or current solutions? 3. Collaborators, such as partners and influencers. Are you relying on partners, resellers, or platforms to help you get your product into the hands of your target customer? 4. Context, such as changing environment and regulations. Is there a compelling event that's driving a purchase now, or are there regulations you need to work around? 5. Competitors. Who else is in the market? Where do you win and where do they lose? How do people solve the problem right now? A note on competitors. When we talk about competitors, we usually think about other providers of our product. For instance, if you're making a movie for Netflix, you might think of your competitors as all the other movies on Netflix. In reality, though, your competitors are every single other way that your target audience can spend their leisure time. This might be playing video games, going to a movie, watching videos on YouTube, reading a book. It's endless. Another example is B2B software. While you might have competitors who people look at if they're considering your solution, your competitors are also how else they might solve the problem, which includes using software like Excel, getting consultants to do it, or just not solving it at all. When you're thinking of competitors, you need to consider a much larger picture than just your category. As you can see, choosing a target market is more involved than simply finding the ideal buyer. It requires studying the overall market and determining whether that is a space where you want to participate. The customers in a particular market may be ideal, but if there are too many competitors active in the space, then it may not be viable. Alternatively, a particular market may seem unattractive because it has a lot of competitors, but if you happen to have collaborators with a lot of clout in that market, then it could be strategically viable. As you design your go-to-market strategy, it's important to consider all of the 5 C's, even if only in passing. Segmentation. As you build your go-to-market strategy, one of the first questions should be, who's going to buy this? And that's a more complicated question than you might think. There are dozens of different ways to define your target audience. Which strategy you choose will depend on your specific circumstances, but here are some tactics you can use to define your ideal client profile, or ICP. Firmographically. In business-to-business marketing, it is common to divide customers based on their industry, because in this case your customer is actually an entire business. Behaviorally. That is, you divide customers based on certain behaviors, such as how much money they spend or how much time they spend using your product. It is very important to focus on your most profitable segments. Motivationally. Overall, we would say that the best approach to segmentation is motivational. That is, you separate your customers based on their motivations for using your product. Demographically. Segmenting based on demographic information like gender and age. These approaches to segmentation are not mutually exclusive. You can actually combine them or use different ones for different purposes. One for strategy and another for media buying, for example. Most marketers rely on their intuition and arbitrary choices to segment the market. Often they don't realize they're doing this because they use quantitative data, which makes them feel as though they're being objective. Wrong. Quantitative data does not make your segmentation objective. Usually, Marketers segment based on industry, gender, usage behavior, or some combination of variables. The problem is they've predetermined which variables are important. How do you actually know that you should be slicing and dicing the market by industry or by gender? Why not by age, or by income, or by time spent using the product, or by time of day using the product? How do you know which variables are most important to divide the market? In marketing today, we're drowning in data. Because of this, you cannot look at the numbers and get an intuitive sense of what's happening. It's impossible. Humans are just too simple to see patterns in massive quantities of data. There is just too much complexity. That's where cluster analysis enters the picture. Cluster analysis. Cluster analysis is one way to systematically approach segmentation and use data to drive your audience targeting, thus laying the foundation for everything else in your go-to-market plan. Here's how it works. First, you collect your raw data. For instance, you might send out a survey asking lots of questions about people's behaviors and motivations when it comes to the type of product you sell. You might ask about firmographic and/or demographic information, behavioral information, or motivational information. For example, what were you doing when you decided you wanted to buy a product in this category? Then, you take the quantitative results and run a statistical process called a cluster analysis. This process automatically clusters all of the data you've collected into segments. Once you have the groups, you can see if those groups correlate to demographic or firmographic data. For example, Group 1 might consist of people who spend a lot of time and money on their laptops. That group could also be predominantly male. While the group is determined by the continuous variables time and money, it correlates positively with the binary variable gender. A common go-to-market mistake is segmenting first with demographic or firmographic data when other data are often more relevant and easier to quantify. You're lucky if your segments align closely with demographic data because that makes targeting easier. Quite often, however, demographic data proves to be irrelevant. Usually, customers segment based on needs that cross demographic and firmographic boundaries. At the end of this process, you'll have a statistically relevant map of insights. For example, say you're a software company who makes a data aggregation tool that syncs the sales and marketing tech stack and pulls out relevant data insights. Once you complete your cluster analysis, you might find that mid-market companies, firmographic, start to look for a product in your category when they're trying to push for Series B round of funding and need to pass stringent due diligence, motivational. Used this way, cluster analysis can be a powerful way to segment and to choose your target customers. Right, I am looking at a picture of a chart. The top of the title says Dendrogram for CLWAR cluster analysis. On the y-axis, there's numbers going from 0 to 5,000, 10,000, 15,000, and 20,000, and is labeled L2 squared dissimilarity measure. On the x-axis is various abbreviations. The chart itself looks like a bunch of squares that are leading to each other, and the reference is labeled Phil Ender. This is a dendrogram, a visualization of what cluster analysis looks like. You can see here that there are basically 3 different clusters of customers. Cluster analysis accounts for many different variables, so it's not easy to make simple statements such as cluster 1 is rich people and cluster 2 is poor people. You need to look closer at the data to see how the clusters differ from one another on each variable. The specifics of how to do a cluster analysis will vary depending on which program you are using, such as SPSS or Stata. This work is absolutely critical to going to market. If you can understand the best people to buy your product, then you're going to be much more successful as you grow and spend your way into the market. How to do cluster analysis. Cluster analysis doesn't have to be some intimidating process that requires business intelligence tools and a master's degree in statistics. Here's how you can cluster your data using Excel and your CRM or system of record. Let's say you have data for 1,000 customers. This includes hard data from your accounting system or Salesforce or wherever that tells you how much revenue these customers generate for the company. Product usage data versus Pendo or a similar tool. Purchase history for each individual customer. And marketing data, like participation in various campaigns or referrals you've received from them. There are countless behavioral metrics you could be collecting. All this data exists in your database, but you might also have tons of data from surveys that tell you things like what motivates them to buy in your category, or what keeps them up at night. How do you make sense of it all? First, pull all the data out of your various systems and plonk it into a spreadsheet. Assign the first column in your spreadsheet to your customers. Every column thereafter should represent the variables you've collected for each customer. For example, your second column might be revenue, and your third column might be time spent using your product per month. Now you might start to see a problem here. Each variable is on a different scale. For instance, how are you supposed to compare revenue to time? If your revenue is measured in millions of dollars and your time is measured in dozens of hours, then the analysis is going to give undue weight towards the millions of dollars. That's why you need to standardize the data. One way to do this is to convert each data point into a z-score. By converting each data point into a z-score, you can fairly compare the numbers. The way you get a z-score is by taking your number, subtracting the average, and then dividing by the standard deviation. You can learn more about this on Khan Academy. So let's take the revenue column. You need to calculate the average revenue for all your customers, followed by the standard deviation. By doing so, you can then replace every dollar figure with the z-score. Next, do the same thing for the time column. Convert every time data point into a z-score. Another problem you're going to run into is that some of your variables are going to be binary, such as sex, or non-continuous, such as state or country. One way to handle these variables is to simply omit them from the cluster analysis. Once you've produced the clusters, you can then determine if those clusters correlate with anything like sex or country. Once you have a spreadsheet with your customer data standardized, you can run cluster analysis using Stata, SPSS, R, Excel, or some other statistical program. These programs will give you the option of producing a visual graphic called a dendrogram. Here you can see how your customer data tends to group into clusters. The output of your cluster analysis might yield something like this. Suppose it generates 4 clusters. Cluster 1 tends to be high in revenue but low on time. Cluster 2 might be low in revenue and low on time. Cluster 3 might be high in revenue and high on time. And Cluster 4 might be low in revenue and high on time. You can then run a correlation test between each cluster and the variables we couldn't test earlier, such as sex or country. You might find that Cluster 1 tends to be skewed towards male. So let's take Cluster 1 as an example. This group is high in revenue generated, low on time spent using your product, and tends to be male. This could be the statistical foundation for a persona. Using cluster analysis, you can pull together disparate data threads to tell a story that you can use in your marketing. And by identifying different variables that tend to correlate to profitable customers, you can spend your marketing dollars efficiently by appealing only to those who are going to actually make your organization money. Look at your most profitable customers. One of the easiest ways to choose a target customer group is to identify who your top customers are. Take a look at your accounting software or CRM. List your clients in order from the most profitable to the least profitable. You may also need to make some assumptions depending on how sophisticated your record keeping is. For example, you might need to use revenue as a proxy for profit. Here's an actual example of a case I worked on. The company had a software system to collect information on transactions and customers. I exported this to Excel and then sorted the customers in order of the amount of sales they generated. If you have thousands of customers, I recommend that you break the data up into deciles. By this, I mean 10 groups. So the first decile will be the top 10% of customers in terms of revenue or profit, and the last decile will be the bottom 10% of customers. Based on the statistical analysis I've done personally and the research I've seen, your profit is probably being driven by a small group of clients. 80% of your profit could be coming from just about 20% of your entire client base. This is the same case I described earlier, only instead of presenting every single customer, I'm presenting 10 clumps of customers. I took the total number of customers and divided that number by 10. That gave me the size of each decile, and then I added up the sales for each decile. I then divided that number by the total sales to the percentage of sales coming from that decile. To arrive at the cumulative percentage of sales, I just added up the numbers from the third column. So what does this data tell us? Well, it shows us that almost 37% of sales are coming from just the first decile. The first deciles account for half the sales. This has huge strategic implications. If over half your sales are coming from just 20% of your customers, then you may want to consider focusing just on that group. The remaining group might not be worth the effort. If you can get more people who look like that top 20%, then you may grow a lot faster. Now that you know where your revenue is coming from, you can do a cluster analysis and see what unites these customers. You want to ask, what issues were they facing when they came to you? What complaints do they have? Why do they keep coming back to you? What compelling event drove their purchase? Segmenting without historic data. The position a lot of startups end in is having to make a lot of decisions around target market definition without a lot of existing data. When this happens, especially if it's very early stage, they go back to selling to the audience they know rather than the audience that is the best fit for the product. Alternatively, they don't define the ICP accurately and try to target everyone. Neither is a good solution. Here's what you can do if you don't have any data. Talk to prospects. Identify where in the market there is evidence of underserved customers. And try to answer these important questions and take action from there. Where's your existing domain expertise? Can you use that to accelerate sales in a specific domain? And is it valuable to tap a local network first? Personas. Once you've identified your target market with or without data, you need to make a decision on personas. Personas are essentially a person you've created that represents your target buyer. The idea is you take your chosen company segment, identify who at that company is going to be the one who buys your product, and you create a person to represent them. For example, if you sell into mid-sized engineer-to-order companies, and the person at your target organization who's involved in every deal is the director of mechanical engineering, your persona might be Mechanical Mike. You'd layer on the demographic information that you know about Mechanical Mike. Male, white, 45 to 67 years old, married, etc. Then the motivational drivers. For example, wants to do a great job, lots of pride in his work. Then the stressors and pains. Doesn't have enough time. Hard to balance time at the office with time with his family. Lots of experience but not a big fan of change, etc. Finally, you'd package all of this information into a cheat card so anyone in the organization can understand your target audience. Personas can be powerful tools, particularly when they're based on data. It's often easier to create compelling campaigns when you have a physical representation of the people you're actually selling to, instead of engineering companies with over $50 million in annual revenue. However, be warned. Personas take an extremely long time to craft well. If you're strapped for resources, then there are usually other go-to-market priorities that should take precedence. The only thing worse than no persona is an inaccurate one. And marketing is often guilty of building personas that don't meaningfully help sales teams or lead to creative that forges a meaningful connection with the audience. Because of the creative flair needed to craft a great sticky persona, they often become traps for what marketing teams suspect or wish their audience was, rather than a useful reflection of what it actually is. Market sizing. However you decide to segment your audience, the next thing you need to do is figure out the size of this target audience to make sure it's big enough to reach your objective. This is called market sizing. Basically, are there enough of your target customers out there who can buy your product? Total addressable market, TAM. One of the best and easiest ways to market size is looking at the investor relations pages for public companies in your industry. Quite often, public companies will post investor presentations that do the work of sizing the market for you. Often this is communicated in terms of a TAM, or total addressable market. For example, if you work in e-commerce, look at the information Amazon and Shopify publish for their investors. If you work in creative software, look to Adobe. Another way to size markets is to look at databases of lead lists. If you work in demand generation, you may have purchased access to a database of companies or leads. You can plug in the criteria you're looking for, such as revenue size and location, and the database will spit out how many companies fit that profile. Keep in mind that the number you will get will only represent a fraction of the market unless your database has every company in the industry. So you will need to inflate whatever number you get. Ask whoever manages the database to estimate how much of the market the database covers. If the estimate is 75%, then you'll need to extrapolate by dividing your numbers by 0.75. A third approach to market sizing is to use the data companies provide you for free in their advertising platforms. When you sign up for advertising with LinkedIn and Facebook, for example, they will tell you how many people or companies fit the profile that you're looking for. You can use these numbers to estimate how many customers are in your target market. You can also do the same title-based sizing based on government census and labor statistics data. If you're targeting an international market, though, this process quickly becomes extremely time-consuming and difficult. The fourth approach to market sizing is to look at third-party research. A research company may have already sized the market. Just look on Google and leverage the research that's already been done. The last approach to sizing markets is to do your own primary research. You could go out and manually count people, products, or companies, and then extract the sample you collected to the overall population. You could also do surveys and extrapolate your data in the same way. Keep in mind that there are a variety of different metrics that can be used to size markets. One is revenues or profits within a market. This information can come from different sources including Statista, investor relations pages, or from market research companies such as Mintel. Another metric could be the number of companies or consumers. Depending on your industry, other metrics may be even more important, such as order volume or pounds of material shipped. Serviceable Attainable Market, SAM. If your TAM is the total number of customers who could potentially buy your product, then your Serviceable Attainable Market, or SAM, is all the customers who could potentially buy your product that you can actually sell to. For example, if you make whistles, your TAM might be the global whistle market. But if you can only service customers in the US, then your SAM would be the US whistle market. SAM is usually geographic, but it doesn't have to be. You might sell design software, but only support English. Therefore, your SAM would be the English-speaking design world. Serviceable Obtainable Market, SOM. Finally, SOM. Your Serviceable Obtainable Market is the section of the market you can reasonably target and who you can expect to purchase your product. Your segmentation work from earlier or any other work you've used to identify your target market should comprise your SOM. As a good rule of thumb, your SOM should be at least twice as big as your revenue objective in a given time period. For example, if your goal is to close $10 million in revenue this year, then the SOM you need to do that needs to be at least $20 million. That's because you'll start to see diminishing returns once you reach 50% market share. As Jeffrey A. Moore explains in Crossing the Chasm, once you hit the halfway point, capturing the remaining 50% of a market becomes more trouble than it's worth. Instead, you should tweak your go-to-market strategy, relaunch into a new market, and do it all over again with all the lessons you've learned. This is called the beachhead technique. Pivot, the harsh reality of diminishing returns. All this work that you've now put in audience identification and segmentation comes with a vicious caveat. You're going to be doing it all over again and soon. Why? Diminishing returns. Diminishing returns are when your advertising dollars achieve progressively worse results for the same spend. Let's say you spend $1 million building awareness for your brand. Your brand awareness, in other words, how familiar people are with your brand, will undoubtedly grow. But it's actually very difficult and expensive to go from high brand awareness to very high brand awareness, so you may want to identify where that inflection point is. Here's an example. In month 1, your advertising spend was 0. Your brand awareness among target was 0%. In month 2, your advertising spend was $100,000, and your brand awareness among target was 3%. In month 3, your advertising spend was $100,000, and your brand awareness among target was 5%. In month 4, your advertising spend was $100,000, and your brand awareness among target was 6%. You can see that if you spend nothing on advertising, you won't have any brand awareness. But let's say that you start spending the same amount on advertising each month. Your brand awareness jumps to 3% in month 2, and then to 5% in month 3, but in month 4, your brand awareness only increases from 5% to 6%. You've invested the exact same amount, but you're getting less return for that investment. I took part of that table and pasted it into Excel. I then inserted a graph to be able to see this visually. Do you notice how the orange line gets less and less steep? That shows the diminishing returns you face with this brand campaign. And under that is a picture demonstrating that. There's an orange line that goes up steeply, but then starts to level out and flatten. You need to decide as a team when it's time to pivot to maximize your returns. Product lifestyle. As you can see, there are a lot of marketing decisions to make, and one critical factor is where you are in the product lifecycle. Here you can see the typical stages in sales curve that are used to depict the lifecycle. I'm looking at a graph. On the y-axis, it says annual sales volume. On the x-axis, it is divided up into 4 parts. 1 is introduction, 2 is growth, 3 is maturity or stabilization, and 4 is decline, and it's labeled as time. And the graph goes up slightly in introduction, a little bit more in growth. It plateaus in maturity or stabilization, and then it goes down in decline. The reference is labeled Wiley and Sons. A lot of thought leadership in marketing comes from people who manage products at the maturity stage. Often these products are consumer packaged goods from companies such as Procter & Gamble. At this stage, there's a strong emphasis on competition and cost cutting to drive up profit margins. There's also a heavy emphasis on massive brand marketing campaigns rather than demand generation campaigns. But for many go-to-market teams, the context is completely different. You might be working with products at the introduction and growth phases. At these stages, you often don't need to focus very much on competitors. That is because the market is growing and can support many different competitors. Moreover, brand awareness may be so low that customers just aren't aware that you even have competitors. And on top of that, cost cutting may also be less important. One reason for this is that growth will come from other sources, such as expanding revenue in a growing market. Your target in this case, early adopters, are also often less price sensitive, so you can make up for high expenses with high prices. In these stages, massive brand marketing is less relevant. You and your competitors probably haven't built up the economies of scale required to invest in TV campaigns, for instance. It's also worth noting that in the early stages of a product's life cycle, it can be difficult to have a strategy at all. The product may change rapidly to accommodate whatever market signals you receive. You don't have a lot of data on customers, and it's difficult to define what your target market really is. What's more, your value proposition may not even be all that different from your competitors. I'm a huge fan of strategy, but I must admit that in the early stages, trial and error can sometimes be more important than strategic planning. Identifying and analyzing competitors. A key factor in selecting a market is understanding the competition. This is a 2-step process. 1, finding your in-market competitors, and 2, finding and understanding your audience's competitive alternatives. Then, you're in a good position to develop compelling value propositions and messaging to drive your go-to-market strategy. Step 1, identify your in-market competition. This is probably the easiest step. The first kind of competition is the one we're familiar with. It's the companies and solutions you lose to after your target audience has decided to spend some money on the problem. So your first step is to identify who the competitors are within your chosen market category. Sometimes this is easy. However, there are probably competitors who you're not thinking of or who you haven't run into during your sales cycles. Fortunately, there's lots of ways to get this information. Use tools like Crayon to track competitors. Use tools like SpyFu, Google Keyword Planner, SEMrush, or Moz to identify competitors based on their online content and advertising strategies. Look at category groupings on review sites like G2, Capterra, Yelp, or Google Reviews. Hire people to research for you on Upwork or Fiverr. Review other organizations' web presences with tools like SimilarWeb. Review your existing data and identify who you're losing deals to. Does anything unite the deals you lose to specific competitors, for example, size, industry, etc.? And complete win-loss analyses with your prospects. Who else did they look at during the sales cycle? Once you have a list of competitors, you need to start analyzing them. First, look at the competitive advantage each competitor has. Competitive advantage basically boils down to just two things. 1, economies of scale, and 2, customer captivity, for example, churn rate. Estimate economies of scale by collecting data on your competitors, such as the number of employees, revenue, venture capital funding, and social media followers. If you aggregate all of these, you can get a sense of their scale. To assess customer captivity, you want to look at things like subscription models, cancellation penalties, customization packages, and personalization options for their products. All these options make it more difficult for customers to leave. And from your perspective, that means your competitors are making it more difficult for you to capture their market share. After looking at competitive advantage at the economic level, I then look at competitors in terms of marketing strategy. Here you want to look at things like what target customers the competitors are going after and how they are communicating value to these customers. Look at their websites to see which verticals or industries they are targeting. Look at how they talk about their value proposition. You will get a sense of the positioning they are trying to use to secure in the market. The third level I look at is tactical. Look at their pricing, packaging, product features, functionality, and anything else that could be relevant, such as advertisements. The downside of this kind of analysis is that it can be endless, so you want to stay focused on the top competitors you've identified. To find this kind of information, start by scouring review sites and discussing these issues with your prospects. These conversations can be a goldmine for this kind of tactical information. By talking to people who have been through sales cycles with other companies, you start to get a sense for where those other companies focus and what they pitch as their value proposition. If you're lucky, you might even get a sense of how your prospects would respond to your product offering, and you can start to shore up your position against those objectives. The best way to help structure this analysis is a framework like the one below. This will give you an idea of market presence, quality of service, and why people do or do not like them. I am looking at a sample table with 7 rows and 4 columns. The rows are labeled competitor, domain authority, SEO Moz, site traffic rank, SimilarWeb, rating, G2, positioning from reviews, ease of use, G2, and specific product weakness. And the columns are labeled A, B, and C. Competitor A has a domain authority of 47, a site traffic rank of 100,000, a rating of 4.0, positioning from reviews is intuitive, ease of use is 6.5, specific product weakness is 2 times more expensive. Competitor B has a domain authority of 37, site traffic rank of 500,000, a rating of 3.0, positioning from reviews, fast and easy, ease of use is 10, specific product weakness is doesn't integrate to Salesforce. Competitor C has a domain authority of 55, site traffic rank of 900,000, rating of 4.9, positioning from reviews, affordable, ease of use 5.5, specific product weakness, low internal adoption. The first step is relatively straightforward. What's more challenging is mapping out your competitive alternatives. Step 2. Identify your competitive alternatives. Competitive alternatives are what your audience would do if your product didn't exist. I like to think of it this way. If someone was solving the problem you solve without buying you or any of the competitors you've identified, how would they do it? For example, let's say you make marketing automation software. Your competitors might be HubSpot, Marketo, and Pardo. Your competitive alternatives might be not doing email marketing, sending emails manually, or only running email marketing through sales cadences via the sales team. Or say, for example, you make running shoes specifically for running on treadmills. Your competitors might be Nike and New Balance. Your competitive alternatives might be swimming, other cardio gym activities like rowing machines, stair climbers, etc., barefoot running, or other less specialized footwear. Finally, let's say you're going to market with a new video game. Since you're primarily offering fun in exchange for time, your competitive alternatives are every other fun way someone could spend time. This includes other media such as TV, Netflix, etc., hanging out with friends, or hobbies or classes. When you think about the customer lifecycle, competitive alternatives tend to come first. Before Netflix came along, for example, their customers were perfectly happy renting DVDs from a local store, until Netflix convinced them that on-demand streaming was what they really wanted. So the first thing you need to do is convince your target audience that they need what you're selling at all. Then, once they're in market, you need to convince them that your product is the best. Remember, you don't define the competition or the market, your customers do, which brings us to the issue of product or market fit. Product market fit. Mark Andreessen, the co-founder of Netscape and later the co-founder of Andreessen Horowitz, defines product market fit as being in a good market with a product that can satisfy that market. Essentially, product market fit means that a company has achieved three things. 1, it has found a market for its product. 2, it has gotten that product into the hands of some of its target audience. And 3, its customers are generally happy with the product and how it's solving their problem. In short, it's an amalgamation of everything we've talked about so far. For startups, finding product market fit is critical. Put bluntly, if they fail to find product market fit, they'll fail completely. Even an amazing team with an amazing product has a small shot of success if it hasn't nailed its product market fit. But an average team with an average product with amazing product market fit will be incredibly successful. Therefore, before you go to market, it's essential that you have product market fit, and that's going to look different depending on your organization. For startups, it means you have secured some level of audience engagement, have a few customers under your belt, and are generally getting positive feedback. You're likely reliant on founder selling and 1 to 2 great reps to get deals across the line. Landing a sale is still a big deal, and a refined, working sales process might not yet be in place. For larger organizations who are launching new products, product market fit will likely be a different beast. Better brand recognition, an already proven market, and a loyal audience all make it much easier to launch something new. However, those same benefits mean that your sales team, driven by quotas, will likely gravitate to your existing product line. What's more, your positioning, messaging, target audience, sales materials, and competitors are likely all different from what your sales team knows. It's critical that you first secure product market fit, that is, selling a few deals, market testing your positioning, seeing if customers are happy, before you really go to market and involve more resources. Product market fit versus go to market. So what's the difference between finding product market fit and going to market? Scale. Product market fit is all finding your target market with testing, iterating, and exploring new ideas until you identify the people who are going to love your product and are enthusiastic to give you money for it. Finding product market fit is an inherently unscalable process because the focus is on riffing on new ideas incredibly quickly until you strike gold. It's also less focused on building a repeatable process because until you find your sweet spot, it's not worth the resources to make sure you can do it again and again. Go-to-market strategy, in contrast, is all about the ability to execute and convert your product market fit into repeatable, predictable revenue. Investing in people, processes, and systems that mean you can reliably deliver on your revenue targets is the name of the game. And I'm looking at another table with two sides, a left and a right side. On the left side, it says product market fit. On the right side, it says go-to-market strategy. And it reads as follows: product market fit, founder VP sales involved on every deal. Go-to-market strategy, executive leadership team is completely hands-off on most sales. Product market fit, sales process is loose. Go-to-market strategy, sales process is buttoned down. Product market fit, average contract value, conversion rates, and other core metrics are still in flux. Go-to-market strategy, baseline metrics are well understood. ROI calculations produce predictable results. Product market fit focuses on MVP and iterative product, sales, marketing testing. Go-to-market strategy, focus on processing optimization to lower customer acquisition cost. Product market fit, testing takes precedence over execution. Go-to-market strategy, execution takes precedence over iteration. Product market fit, inherently unscalable. Go-to-market strategy, endlessly scalable. Product market fit, marketing is focused on defining audiences, positioning, and messaging. Go-to-market strategy, marketing is focused on generating demand within your target audience. Chapter summary questions. Is your target audience large enough to support your business goals? Is there demand for your product beyond what the market is currently supplying, or are you creating demand for long-term category domination? Have you identified your specific segments, including your TAM, SAM, and SOM? Do you know your competitors, competitive alternatives, and have you positioned your product to win against both? Do you have product market fit?
The single most important thing that I want you to remember from this section is that nothing matters more than the sheer size of your market. You can have perfect marketing execution, you can have a perfect value proposition, but if there just is not enough demand, you've completely wasted your time and resources. One of the key things that distinguishes product marketing managers from conventional marketing managers is strategic focus. That means you're less concerned with perfect messaging, less concerned with perfect conversion rates, and you're much more concerned with the absolute potential market. That market potential is also the highest priority for potential investors. Moreover, at the end of the day, the single biggest competitive advantage that you could possibly have is economies of scale.
Part 2. Value propositions. Understanding your value. Now that you know who you're targeting, you need to refine what your unique value proposition is for your go-to-market strategy. Your value proposition isn't an ad or a piece of marketing collateral. It's an internal tool to help the entire go-to-market team understand what you bring to the table for your target audience. Collectively, your segmentation, value proposition, and messaging, which we'll address in the next section, form the foundational core of your entire go-to-market approach. In this chapter, we're going to define the key components that make up a value proposition, explain how to calculate the dollar value of your product, explore what to do if your value isn't attributable to a dollar figure. By the end of this chapter, you'll understand what a value proposition is, where it fits in your go-to-market strategy, and how to find one for your own product. The value proposition. A value proposition is a fundamental component of your marketing strategy. It is all the benefits you are offering, all the ways you create value, documented and outlined in a single place. It's an internal tool that will help focus your marketing on the value you bring to solve specific pains for your specific audience. A good value proposition should be made up of 3 different components: competitive advantage, positioning, and USP. However, marketers often use these terms interchangeably when in fact they mean very different things. So we're going to dive into what each one is and how it relates to your value proposition. Of course, it's entirely possible to go to market without all 3 components. However, the strongest go-to-market strategy will be delivered by organizations who have multiple components in place. For example, if you have no competitive advantage over your next best alternative, but you have great positioning, you can successfully capture significant market share. However, you're going to be relatively easy to displace down the road. That's why we recommend when you're building your go-to-market strategy and your value proposition, you try and anchor it to as many components as possible. This might mean you develop additional product features, target audiences, or pricing and packaging configurations to check every value proposition box. Competitive advantage. Competitive advantage is an economic term that means a condition or circumstance that puts a specific company in a superior business position. There are 4 common types of competitive advantages. 1. Economies of scale. A company can produce more of their product at a lower cost because they're producing a lot of it, which makes it difficult for others to compete due to the low cost a specific company can offer. Mass-producing suits versus bespoke suits are an example of this, where the mass-produced suit can offer a much better price and capture more of the market because of it, due to the fact that they're making lots of suits at once, and thus paying less to make each one. 2. Customer captivity. The cost and resources of switching to a competitor are very high, so it's hard for customers to switch. B2B subscription software, SaaS, often rely on this, since switching to another SaaS provider will likely require implementation, data, process, and people change, all of which are costly to the business and politically taxing internally for the people involved. 3. Enforced competitive advantages. Government licenses can prevent competitors from entering a market and offer a competitive advantage to those who hold the licenses. Telecommunications, infrastructure, transit, and energy companies are often an example of this. 4. Technology advantage. When a company has developed a truly innovative product that is both patent protected or impossible to replicate. Pharmaceutical companies are a good example of this sort of competitive advantage when they develop a new drug that can do what no one else can do. A word of warning about technology advantage. It's easy to fall back on technology advantage as your competitive advantage, especially for tech companies. The reality, however, is that most technology companies do not, in fact, have a technology advantage. Yes, they solve a problem in a unique way, but generally speaking, it's not sufficiently different from the next best alternative to be a true moat. There are exceptions, of course. For legacy solutions, moving to the cloud is incredibly resource-intensive, if it's possible at all. So cloud-first products have a significant moat. Another example is data. Gong.io, for example, is a sales engagement and call recording solution for sales teams. Their technology records calls so sales reps and managers can listen back on the call and coach sellers to improve. However, that technology is very easy to replicate. So Gong.io created a competitive advantage with data and machine learning. They analyze all the calls of their customers, creating a huge database of sales calls, and then use machine learning on those calls to build a world-class recommendation engine. Their technology advantage isn't their product technology, but rather an advantage in data and machine learning, both of which are very difficult to replicate quickly. Unique selling proposition, USP. Your unique selling proposition is the single reason that sets you apart from both the competition in your category and from the next best alternative. It should be the combination of a critical feature set, the benefit that the customer gets, and how that relates to the pain you solve for. Of course, this is often very similar to your positioning, as we'll see in a second. The difference is that your USP is highly specific. It's a single feature or feature set that sets you apart from everyone else. For example, if you were selling a gaming system, one unique value proposition might be exclusive rights to a specific game that is only available on your system. By honing in on a hyper-specific feature set or benefit, you make it very clear to your potential customers why they would buy you over someone else. It's a single thing you can point to and say, this is how we're different from everyone else. Defensible USP. One challenge that startups in particular have is finding a defensible USP. What we mean is that your USP must be inarguably unique to you, ideally backed by data and social or third-party proof. For example, a lot of companies want to make customer service their USP because they're great at it and their customers love it. But is that defensible? No. Unless you've won an award or been recognized by analysts like Forrester or Gartner, or you'd be the highest ranking company or something like G2, it's not something you can concretely say we are the best. Plus, you'll have to look long and hard before you find a company who says we have terrible customer service. Rather, your USP should ideally be something your competitors say, no, we don't do or have that. Otherwise, it's extremely easy to counter in a head-to-head, and it makes it hard for the customer to understand why they should buy you instead of someone else. Positioning. Finally, positioning. Positioning is the choice about which aspect of your product you're going to focus on to add the most value to your target audience. In other words, positioning is about staking a claim to say, this is who we are and how we help. If you don't want this, then our product is not for you. Of course, this is incredibly scary. You're actively saying our product is not for this type of customer, and we address this in more detail in the next section on messaging. For now, though, there are a few things about positioning that are worth calling out now. 1. Positioning is critical. You need to actively select what makes you unique. 2. Positioning often feels like it should be obvious, but it rarely is. Remember, what gets you excited is probably not the same thing that gets your customers excited. 3. Positioning is as much about saying what you're not as what you are. It's tempting to be something for everyone, but that rarely works. 4. Every product is positioned. Either it's done by you telling the world what you are and what you do, or it's done by the market telling you who you are and what you do. Once you've identified these 3 core components, you can start to move on to the last step of outlining a value proposition, actually calculating the value to customers of your solution. Value, how customers benefit. Value is the dollar amount that customers get back when they buy your product. A simple example might be your product cost $100 and it saves your customers $500. Your value is $400. Value is usually very dry and mathematical and is something that you actually calculate. And there's a footnote here that says we'll cover uncalculatable value in the next section. For example, saving people thousands of dollars on lubricant costs per month, or reducing their order processing time by 1 minute. Even if your product doesn't actually save your customers money, it may still save them theoretical money. That is, the money that they would otherwise have to spend if they didn't adopt your solution. Calculating product value. Calculating value can be complex, but the theory is simple. First, identify the cost of doing nothing, continuing to live with the pain. Then, calculate the cost plus benefit of solving the problem in a different way. This might be a competitor. Finally, look at your own product. What's the cost of your product, and what sort of return can your customers expect to get? Let's say your product is an energy-efficient light bulb for factories. Compared to a regular light bulb, that is the cost of doing nothing, it might save your customers $10,000 per year in expenses. Your customer is also looking at other energy-efficient light bulb providers, your competitors. Maybe your best competitor can save them $8,000 per year in expenses. If that's the case, your value is $2,000 over and above the next best alternative. This table lays all of the cost savings out. I'm looking at a table here. It says cost savings, U, competition, and difference. And the categories are electricity. U is $10,000. Competition is $8,000. Difference is $2,000. Labor. U is $5,000. Competition is $6,000. Difference is negative $1,000. Oil. U is $1,000. Competition is $1,000. Difference is $0. Total. U is $16,000. Competition is $15,000. Difference is $1,000. So you're able to significantly lower their electricity costs, their labor costs, and their oil costs compared to a regular light bulb. Compared to doing nothing, the value you add is $16,000. Since you do have some competition, the value you offer compared to your next best alternative is $1,000. When it comes to value propositions, you need to look at your value compared to the next best alternative. since that's how the customer is going to look at it. Your goal is to say, we offer X amount of dollars of additional value compared to the next best solution to your problem. Let's look at another example. This is an actual value proposition I worked on for a software product. As the table shows, that value came from three main sources: savings through inventory, savings through automation, and savings through returns. And it reads, savings from reduced inventory, $375,000. Savings from automation, $59,904. Savings from fewer returns, $1,350,000. Product price, $22,360. As you can see, the most significant savings was through returns. In fact, it was so much larger than the other two that it really helped us focus our USP and positioning on the problem that we solved really, really well. Since we contributed so much value through reducing returns, that became our core position in the market. In these two examples, the value comes directly from cost savings. But remember, there are a few different ways that a company can offer value. Cost saving is by no means the only one. For example, your value proposition might include incremental profits rather than just reduced costs. An incremental profit is the value that a customer gains when a product adds to their revenue. We use the term incremental here because for every dollar your product adds to revenue, it only adds a fraction of profits. So the value here is the incremental profit added. Why bother calculating value? Many marketers rely on messaging to drive value, focusing on what customers want to hear rather than focusing on where the product adds value. But as the examples above illustrate, a bit of math can help you to quantify the value that your product creates in your target market. And once you've done that, you'll have an easier time pitching to your target audience. Let's say you're selling software that automates when lights turn on and off in big commercial buildings. How do you sell this to prospects? Automate your lighting. Save time with automatic lights. The best lighting software. There are many different approaches you could take with these headlines, and chances are that most would miss the mark. That's because you haven't actually identified the value that you are creating. You need to break it down. How does your software actually help the business? How does it affect the profit equation? Profit equals price minus cost multiplied by quantity. There are a few possibilities for how your software might drive value. Because the lights are automatic, that might mean that customers don't need to hire staff to go around turning lights on and off. That could cut costs. The lighting might foster a special mood in the building, or a more pleasant customer experience. This could help boost revenues. The lights might spend more time turned off, reducing energy costs. When marketers do positioning, they often guess at which benefit is most important and build campaigns around that. But a more sophisticated approach is to actually calculate how much value is created from each possible benefit and run the one that offers the most value. So, of the three benefits, let's say that lower energy cost is the one with the most value. Sure, the savings for an individual building might be marginal, but when these costs are scaled across 10 or more buildings, the energy savings are substantial. Now we're honing in on the main benefit of the value proposition: lowering the customer's energy costs. Along the way, we've better defined the target customer, companies with 10 or more large stores or buildings. These prospects have substantial energy costs, so cutting expenses becomes more important. With this information, a company can put the most valuable benefit, in this case lower electric bills, at the heart of its positioning, making a much stronger case for customers as it goes to market. What to do if you can't calculate value? Math is undoubtedly your friend when it comes to value propositions, but there are a raft of products that provide significant value that can't be calculated easily. Either the value isn't monetary at all, or the value is intangible. It's not something you can easily attach a dollar figure to. This is particularly common for B2C companies. For example, imagine you are marketing Coca-Cola. Technically, for the customer, the dollar value is the calories and enjoyment they're getting at a low price. But of course, that's not how Coca-Cola markets itself. Instead, the value it provides its customers is cool. It creates and markets an image of what a Coke drinker is, then sells the drink as the path to achieving the image they've created. So if a dollar value is not part of your value proposition, You need to focus on compelling use cases for your target audience. What is the number one most important value that your product brings to the table? And why do they specifically want to access that value that your product brings? Let's go back to our Coca-Cola example. If the value they provide is a cool image, then they might tailor that value to specific audiences. For example, if they were targeting grandparents, they might focus on how Coca-Cola can help them connect with their grandkids because it's a cool drink. Conversely, if Coca-Cola was targeting teens, they might focus on how Coke can make you popular at school, since that's probably what cool means to teenagers. Your value proposition does not need to be unique. Here's a final note on value propositions. They don't always need to be unique. Marketers spend a lot of time trying to figure out their USP, and this is certainly a worthwhile exercise, but you don't always need to emphasize how unique your product is. For example, you might be selling something that is a non-strategic purchase, such as plastic screws. Your buyer probably doesn't care what makes your product unique. They just want something reliable at a reasonable price. In this case, emphasizing uniqueness is a waste of time. Or let's say you're operating in a brand new, innovative market. Your customers might have zero knowledge of your competitors. In a case like this, there's no point in emphasizing how you're different from your competitors. Instead, just focus on communicating how you create value. Chapter summary questions. Does your product create enough value for the customer to be worth buying? Have you identified your competitive advantage, positioning, and unique selling proposition? Have you calculated the value you add to your customer and linked it to a specific benefit or feature? Have you tied your value calculation to your USP, positioning, and competitive advantage to build a complete and robust value proposition? Can the value you create be measured in dollars and cents, or are you bringing a more nebulous concept of value to your customers? Have you identified the part of your product that brings the most value?
The main thing that I want you to remember from this section is that the primary function of marketing is to create and communicate value for customers, partners, and your company. The key is to get very specific about how exactly you create value. And often that's not apparent until you do some research. So for example, by talking to customers or potential customers, by calculating and assigning a monetary value to each and every benefit or feature, and how much value you create is constrained strongly by how much value your competitors also create.
Part 3. Messaging. What to say and how to say it. Messaging is how you tell the world about your product. It answers the question, why should I buy this? It bridges the gap between 1. Positioning, where you define what you sell, who you sell it to, and the value they get, and 2. Demand generation or advertising, where you tell the world about your product. If you have a tightly defined audience and a clear value proposition, you're in a good place to develop great messaging. Great messaging tells your target audience what you do and why they should buy you, uses the language your target audience uses, surfaces the problem your audience has and drives action to solve it, and communicates the value you provide. You want to build a messaging framework that gives you both the flexibility to play in multiple channels and across campaigns, but still stays laser focused on solving the problem you've defined. Your messaging framework should also work to positively build your brand equity. One question I get a lot is, why bother with all of this? Our sales team knows what to say and who to say it to. It's a good question. Building a messaging framework is time-consuming and can feel a little bit redundant. But the reality is that without a framework, your messaging will drift off course as you run different campaigns, produce different pieces of content, and hire new sales reps for your growing go-to-market team. To keep your product and your company moving in lockstep towards your objective, you need to keep everyone on message all the time. And a messaging framework is the best tool to do that. The process I outlined for building a messaging framework in this chapter is based on the Pragmatic Marketing Framework and the positioning book Obviously Awesome by April Dunford. I've used it to build messaging frameworks for complex B2B products, and it works wonders for keeping your messaging focused. In what follows, we're going to walk through the 6 steps you need to go through to build a great messaging framework. Once we have those 6 steps down pat, the rest of the chapter will focus on copywriting. This is the other side of the messaging coin. If your messaging framework helps you work out what to say, copywriting is all about figuring out how to say it. The copywriting section of the chapter offers a few essential rules of thumb that will help you communicate effectively with your target audience. Building your marketing framework. Building a messaging framework can seem like a mammoth task, but it can effectively be broken down into 6 manageable steps. 1. Find the features your audience cares about. 2. Find the advantage of your selected features. 3. Link your advantages to value. 4. Group the benefits you offer by themes. 5. Map values to personas and build use cases. And 6. Build the framework. In this section, we take a deep dive into each of these steps, looking at why they matter and how to execute them effectively. Step 1. Find the features your audience cares about. Your product has dozens of features. You need to list them all out, then select the ones your audience cares about. For instance, say you sell TVs. Your product has lots of features, including a black stand, a power cord, plug-and-play software, a remote, and 4K resolution. Of these features, it's pretty clear that the 4K resolution is the feature that the target audience is going to care about. Having a remote probably isn't going to convince anyone to buy. At the end of this step, you should have a refined feature list of things your product does that your audience actually cares about. There are a few ways to get this information. Talk to your existing customers, if any, about what features they love about your product or competing products. Review old support logs or call transcripts. Are there consistent requests to address a problem that your new product solves? Talk to your product owners. Why did they recommend building a feature in the first place? Step 2. Find the advantages of your selected features. Now that you have your features, you need to define their advantages. An advantage is why you included a specific feature. It's the positive outcome that your feature creates. If we go back to our TV example, the advantage of 4K resolution is crystal clear picture quality. Advantages should be relatively easy to come up with since you presumably built the product in a specific way for a specific reason. Step 3. Link your advantages to value. People don't buy features or advantages, they buy the value or benefit that they get from your product. Value is the so what of your product features and advantages, and if you can clearly communicate the value of your product and do it in the language of your target audience, you're legions ahead of most go-to-market teams. Most messaging stops at advantages. That's because linking your features to value and benefits is extremely challenging. It requires deep customer knowledge as well as empathy to understand what they're struggling with. What makes this doubly challenging for go-to-market teams is that they know the product so well, and when we know a product, we're generally very good at describing what it is and what it does, but not so good at describing why someone should care. It's so ingrained in us that it's hard to put into words. We lose the forest through the trees. The result is that most teams go to market with features and advantages and make the consumer create the value themselves. But it doesn't need to be this way. By forcing yourself to clearly delineate between advantages and value, you can chip away at your product to get to the core reason that someone would buy it. So how do you make this important distinction between advantages and value? The best way to move from advantages to benefits is to look at each advantage and ask, so what? Why does our audience care about this? Let's go back to our TV example. The feature is 4K resolution. The advantage is crystal clear resolution. So what? Why should I care about the resolution? Well, the benefit is that you'll feel transported to whatever you're seeing on the screen. For some products, particularly heavy commoditized products with lots of competition, you might be able to rely on your audience to convert the advantage into a benefit themselves. That's why we often see ads for consumer tech products like headphones, cameras, and TVs that simply spout features as though they're clear advantages. For instance, a TV ad might just say 4K resolution in your living room, or a camera ad might just say the new iPhone has a 12 megapixel camera. These products don't have to explain the so what because consumers have enough context that they already know. However, relying on this is a dangerous game. It makes it harder to differentiate your product as competitors copy your features and advantages, so it can leave you vulnerable to alternative providers. Your audience might only translate your features and advantages in one specific way, whereas you might be able to think of more and more compelling value. One of the best ways to get from advantages to value is to talk to your target audience. Listen for what they complain about, don't like, or struggle with. What do they wish was different in their professional or personal lives, and where do those wants overlap with your solution? These sorts of discussions can give you the insight you need to get to your product's so whats. At the end of this stage, you should have a table that looks like this. On the leftmost side, feature. What does the product do? In the middle, advantages. What's the advantage for our target audience? And the rightmost side, value. So what? Why does our audience care? Step 4. Group the benefits you offer by theme. As you build out your benefits, you'll likely see some themes emerge. That is, multiple advantages and features usually lead to similar benefits, or benefits tie together neatly into a package. Therefore, the next step is focused on codifying lots and lots of values into a few major buckets. As you begin to go to market, you'll see which segments of your audience respond best to which theme and can tailor your campaigns accordingly. Step 5. Map values to personas and build use cases. You need to map everything you've done to your target personas. If you didn't build target personas, simply map them to the relevant people in your buying committee, the group of titles usually involved in your deals. Take your themes and see where they fit most effectively. Naturally, this matching will change as you go to market and learn what's working and what isn't, but it's good to have a starting point. It's also valuable to create use cases that map to your personas. If you know the value you deliver, how is the use case of that value different for different personas? Take our TV again. The value is that it transports you to whatever you're seeing on the screen. That's a great start, but it's pretty generic. To make it more compelling, you can tailor it to personas with use cases for each one. For instance, if a segment you're targeting is sports fans, the use case might be transport yourself to the big game. It's essentially the same value, it's just reframed to suit the audience. Step 6. Build the framework. Your final step is to put all of this in a framework, which you can use to understand what you say, why you say it, and to whom. It's also helpful at this stage to create short summaries of your product. I like a 1-sentence summary, a 2-sentence summary, and a 5-sentence summary. These summaries are surprisingly useful, both as an exercise to condense all the work you've done down into something very small, but also as an asset to have on hand. They always come in handy. Reps can draw on them when they're practicing their elevator pitch. You can drop them into bios of executives if you're featured in the news, and they can even act as a functional anchor to keep discussions about your messaging tight. You might be thinking that this is a lot of work to end up where you already are, but building your messaging framework and putting it down on paper in this concrete way is critical. It not only makes your messaging a lot easier for other internal teams to consume and understand, it also forces you to confront your thinking about why a specific benefit is important and what feature set best tells the story of that benefit. It's also worth noting that although you'll build your framework from features down to use cases, your framework should operate in the opposite direction. So when you put your framework into practice, you should be focusing on the granular, specific value that you bring to your customers first, before diving into how you do it, which are the advantages, and what you actually sell, which are the features. Once this final step is complete, you're ready to tackle copywriting. Your messaging framework has successfully set out what to say. Now it's time to figure out how to say it. That's where copywriting comes in. Copywriting. It's impossible to talk about messaging without talking about copywriting. Copywriting is how your messaging makes its way out into the world. Of all the parts of go-to-market strategy, copywriting is probably the most misunderstood. Often, when people hear copywriting, they imagine Don Draper dreaming up slogans like, "It's toasted," on the spot for clients. They picture creative agencies coming up with things like, "Got milk?" or "What's up?" or "Because you're worth it." In reality, though, copywriting is about communicating the value of your product to your audience as clearly as possible in a way that compels action. It might be super creative and innovative, but it also might not. Often, effective copywriting is really straightforward. Here are 5 rules of thumb to help you as you communicate with your target audience. Number 1, speak directly to the buyer and do it conversationally. Some of the strongest words in copywriting are words like you and your. You want to speak directly to the buyer as you would in a one-on-one conversation, and you want to do it in a language that they use every day. To achieve this, try to follow these 4 guidelines. 1, use a conversational tone. This means avoiding academic, professional speech that is overly formal or grammatically correct. For example, writing "such as" might be grammatically correct when you're about to list some examples, but in reality, most people would simply say "like." Generally, the best copywriting has a more informal, conversational ring to it. 2, write in the second person as though you were speaking directly to the buyer. For example, "Automate your accounting" is better than "automation for accounting." It's more personal, it speaks more directly to the audience, and it's also more compelling and directive. You're telling your audience what they specifically will be able to do once they buy your awesome product. 3, write in the present tense. This takes the abstract future benefit and makes it seem more tangible. For example, "Get a girlfriend" is better than "you will get a girlfriend," or "you will have a girlfriend." Note here the use of the imperative mood, writing in a way that commands or requests. 4, write in the active tense. Technically, this means that the subject performs the action of the verb in a sentence, rather than the subject being acted upon by the verb. For those of you who aren't active members of the grammar police, this basically means that your writing is going to have a lot more impact. For example, "Get 10% off" has a lot more power than "10% off will be had by you." One of the easiest rules of thumb is this: avoid the words "be" and "by" in your copywriting. It won't work all the time, but it'll help a lot. Number 2, witty, brief headlines usually aren't effective. Keep it straightforward. Ads that try to be clever are rarely effective. Most of the time, it's better to go with a more direct headline that communicates how your product creates value. There are a huge number of meaningless headlines out there that try to be brief or clever. You know the ones. Maybe there's a period after each and every word, or some abstract joke posted on a billboard. But here's the thing that you've probably noticed. These ads don't usually drive you towards a desired action. At best, they give you a chuckle and make you feel warm and fuzzy about the brand behind them. In general, it's better to just get to the core of how your product creates value. You can do this by focusing on the outcomes that the customer wants. For example, double your income in 1 year, or save $10,000 in energy costs. These headlines communicate the value achieved from whatever it is that you're selling. When it comes to writing headlines, another thing we advise is to write in the sentence case. That is, capitalizing only the first word of the headline and proper nouns. This lets you write longer, clearer headlines, and it'll help you avoid short, witty, and confusing ones. Number 3, cheesy, salesy writing works. At the tactical level, I think most of us have lost the art of salesy copywriting. Over the past few decades, it seems marketers have fallen into the habit of producing copywriting that reads well and is even a bit formal at the expense of salesmanship. But the truth is, cheesy, salesy writing works better. John Kappels proves the effectiveness of this style in his books Making Ads Pay and Tested Advertising Methods. The modern demand generation guru Howard Sewell also demonstrates this in his article, But Wait, There's More: Why Cheesy Copy Still Works. So what kind of writing is effective? Phrases like, "But wait, there's more." Use of the ellipsis instead of proper sentences so that the reader is encouraged to keep reading. Short, punchy sentences. Incorporation of enthusiasm. Many writers seem to lack enthusiasm in their writing. Promising quick results, phrases like announcing, introducing, new, and free. Making specific promises such as you will make $100,000. Remember, these phrases will be different depending on what you're selling. Being salesy only works if your salesy offer is something that your audience wants. Number 4, stay on brand. Staying on brand means using language that is consistent with the brand, and this is one of the most important considerations in effective copywriting. Many companies will have a brand guide, but if not, you may need to make one from scratch in order to keep your copywriting on brand and on message. The brand guide should outline what kind of personality your brand has, and it may even go into detail about the specific type of copywriting that you should be trying to execute. Here's an example where brand compliance is important. This is an ad for Metromile. Notice the funny poetry in the beginning and use of the word ta-da. This is a very casual and friendly brand. It sounds as though Metromile wants to be your friend. Roses are red, pay-per-mile car insurance could cut your bill in half. Ta-da! If you were writing messages for this brand, you'd want to be consistent and use this chummy language. This is important because consistency will help to build a strong brand position in your customer's mind. Inconsistency, on the other hand, dilutes your brand positioning. Brand guides can get much more specific than this. They might even include some complete phrases that you can pull. Each feature might have key bullet points that have already been vetted by copywriters or executives in your company. Number 5, be persuasive. We can't overstate how important this is. Think back to our definition earlier. Copywriting is communicating the value of your product to your audience as clearly as possible in a way that compels action. That last piece, compels action, is key, but it often gets forgotten. Copywriting is fundamentally about changing behavior. That could be persuading prospects to buy a product, use a feature, click a button, believe in your company, or to take some sort of action. The thought leader on persuasion is the Professor Robert Cialdini, who is famous for his book Influence. These are his key drivers of persuasion. Scarcity. People are motivated to take action if they believe something is scarce. For example, using the phrase 3 days left persuades people to act because whatever you're offering is only available for 3 days. If it were available all the time, there's no sense of urgency. People prioritize things that are time sensitive. People don't like missing out. Consensus. People are motivated to do things if they believe other people are doing that same thing. Social proof is an incredibly strong persuasive tactic. A good example of this is 90% of people prefer. If 90% of people prefer this option, then the user will likely choose that action. Some people are nonconformists, of course, but the vast majority of people rely on consensus or social proof to make decisions. This is particularly true in situations where the user isn't informed enough to make a decision on his or her own. Authority. People are persuaded if someone in a position of authority tells them to do something. Using phrases such as Dr. Joe Stevens or the expert in this field will persuade people. Reciprocity is also an important consideration. As humans, we have a compulsion to reciprocate when we are given something. Giving people something for free could motivate people to take action in return. Consistency. People want to be consistent. If they told you something in the past, they want their future actions to be consistent with what they said. You could remind people of what they did in the past by using phrases such as, "Since you enjoyed." This may prompt people to buy something or take an action consistent with past actions. Lastly, people are persuaded by things they like. Using cheesy phrases such as, "You are awesome," can give your product more persuasive power. User experiences with this type of language can be particularly pleasant. Flattery is a powerful tool for building your brand personality and giving your brand product persuasive power. Copywriting example. This example of Udemy's messaging helps illustrate some of the major copywriting rules of thumb that we've covered in this chapter section. The ad reads, "Weekend sale. Put your dreams first today and learn for only $28.99 Canadian. 1 day left." Let's start with persuasion. Udemy is really emphasizing a sense of urgency by using scarcity. 1 day left. Weekend sale. Put your dreams first today. They're not drawing on other persuasion tactics like consensus or authority, but there are hints of liking here. Put your dreams first, for example. People tend to like it when conversations center around them. And the your is also important here. Personalization itself is a useful tool for persuasion. This messaging also highlights an important point. Not every message you write needs to use every tactic at once, but good messaging will usually use at least one. The copywriting here is also direct. It tells the buyer exactly what they should do. Put their dreams first by taking advantage of Udemy's sale, and how they'll benefit, and it uses all the right grammatical conventions to drive that action. It's written in the second person, and it uses the present and active tenses. It's also fairly conversational. None of the language is complex or academic. It reflects how Udemy's customers actually speak. And finally, the headline is straightforward and it avoids the temptation to be witty or clever. Notice how they've broken the message down into two parts. Weekend sale and put your dreams first today and learn for only $28.99 Canadian. The first part is short, sweet, and to the point. The second is longer and more involved, and it's written as a full sentence. Using a full sentence here lets them write a longer, clearer, and ultimately more informative message. Chapter summary questions. Have you defined your feature set, linked your features to advantages, connected those advantages to your value and benefits, and grouped similar value benefits together? Have you built a messaging framework to be used across your go-to-market team? And have you zeroed in on your copywriting and messaging to make sure the go-to-market team is telling the right story in the right way?
The most important thing to remember from this section is that you have to make important strategic trade-off decisions about what your messaging is and is not going to emphasize. This involves mapping your features and benefits to what specific decision makers value. It also involves using the foundational tactics of persuasion and marketing psychology.
Part 4. Go-to-market team. Who needs to get involved? Going to market is a team sport. There might technically be a go-to-market owner, and in small organizations, this might even be the CEO. But ultimately, it's a collaborative effort. Generally, go-to-market teams are made up of everyone who touches the customer throughout the customer lifecycle: sales, marketing, and customer success or support. This chapter dives into the details of the how of going to market, with a special emphasis on the go-to-market team and their various roles and responsibilities. This chapter is divided into 3 sections, each focusing on a particular segment of the go-to-market team. We focus on explaining the role of marketing, product marketing, and demand gen, sales in high and low ACV settings, and customer success. Marketing. Marketing often leads the go-to-market strategy because they have so much influence early on. As you might have noticed, marketing covers most of the stages of go-to-market strategy that we've covered so far. Marketing teams are also well positioned to lead the go-to-market strategy because they connect product, sales, and customer success. When it comes to go-to-market, marketing's role is divided into 2 large branches. The first is product marketing. Product marketing's role is to do everything we've outlined so far: define the audience, identify the market, define the value proposition, create the messaging, and outline the channel mix. Oftentimes, product marketing is heavily involved in both internal and customer-facing content, including research papers, blog posts and webinars, battle cards, sales wikis, and persona documents, and case studies. The second is demand generation. The role of demand generation is to further define the channel mix, execute the actual marketing campaigns, and iterate and test to drive down the cost of acquiring customers. Each of these functions can also cover additional areas of expertise, including field marketing, brand marketing, content marketing, and digital marketing. In smaller organizations, these functions are often all run by one or two people, with product marketing taking on content and brand, and demand gen taking on digital and field marketing. Sales. Sales is responsible for one thing: closing business. This function is so critical that most organizations go to extreme lengths to keep their sales team motivated and laser focused on that and only that. How you approach sales with your go-to-market team depends on your average contract value, or ACV. Why? Because sales means headcount, the most expensive part of any go-to-market strategy. That means that you need to be selling something that's valuable enough to justify a salesperson and their salary, plus make the commission worth their time. For instance, say you're selling cell phone cases online for $3.99 each. That value isn't high enough to justify a sales team. Conversely, if you're selling construction equipment for $10 million, then it's definitely worth the salesperson's salary. Generally speaking, B2B sales is worth having that high-touch, one-to-one sales experience because the ACV tends to be higher. On the other hand, B2C gravitates towards low-touch, transactional, hands-off sales. High ACV sales, B2B. High ACV sales teams going to market are structured like this. Market development reps are responsible for responding to inbound leads. These teams increasingly report into marketing rather than sales. Business development reps are responsible for outbound prospecting and booking meetings for account executives to close business. Account executives are responsible for handling the meetings that inbound and outbound reps book and taking customers from an initial meeting to a closed deal. Account executives might be field reps on the road and visiting customers in person, or part of an inside sales team. When you're building your go-to-market strategy, you need to carefully consider how many reps you're going to need and in what roles to achieve your specific business goals. This goes for large and small organizations because at a small one or a startup, you're deciding how many bodies to hire, and at large ones, you're deciding how many bodies to dedicate to the product. In both cases, you're committing significant resources, which means that you need to think carefully about how you're going to achieve a positive ROI. Sales operations. There's one more critical sales function that you need to go to market: sales operations. For any business, the key to successful go-to-market execution is twofold. 1. Finding opportunity for growth in your organization's data, or the market if you're a startup. And 2. Understanding and adapting your tactics and strategy on the fly in response to early indicators you see in sales data as it rolls in. For instance, say you're selling bulldozers to mid-sized manufacturing firms. Your sales cycles might be 12 months long, but you don't want to find out a year down the line to find out your positioning is all wrong or your messaging isn't resonating. You need to be tracking data along the way to optimize your conversion rate at every step of the sales cycle. And because sales teams are the bleeding edge of customer interactions, they're the ones that actually gather the data that other departments use to make decisions. Which means you need a clear sales process before you go to market so that you can track performance over time and see if your go-to-market initiative is on track to achieve your overall goal. It's often worth hiring or getting a freelancer to help you set up your go-to-market sales process and make sure you're capturing the data you need as prospects go through the buying process. Low ACV sales, B2C. Sales teams usually play a much smaller role in B2C organizations, or B2B organizations selling to small businesses, because the average contract value is low. Instead, the final point-to-point sale is executed through a different transactional mechanism. This can be through a channel distribution partner, for example, if your product is stocked in a store or sold on Amazon, through an e-commerce store that you control, or in your own store. Customer success. The final major component of the go-to-market team is customer success. This is the team that guides customers from when they sign a contract, through implementation, and on to continuing success. For software as a service businesses who rely on customers renewing to achieve profitability, customer success is critical because they're responsible for keeping the customers that close sales. In addition to their implementation and support responsibilities, customer success is increasingly responsible for renewals, upsells, and cross-sells, primarily because upsells and cross-sells are fantastic for a business. Upsells and cross-sells ingrain your company into the lives of your customers, decreasing customer churn, and increase the customer value as they purchase more product. Most importantly, though, you've already spent a big chunk of time and resources to acquire them. The more value you can extract from them, the better your return on investment. And if you include customer success on the go-to-market team, then you can strategically acquire customers who will grow into high-value accounts over time. Customer success can drive profitability because, number one, word of mouth only happens if you have happy customers. And since word of mouth has proven again and again to be the most cost-effective marketing channel, ignoring it is literally leaving money on the table. Word of mouth is especially important if you're a small or unknown brand or startup, when every customer is critical to your overall success. Number two, customer acquisition costs are too high to not retain. For subscription, freemium, and try before you buy products in particular, retention is critical to the economics of your organization. You need to keep your churn rate low. But even for companies selling one-off products, it's far less expensive to keep a customer than acquire a new one. Upsells and cross-sells rely on happy customers. You're not going to buy more of something if the organization you purchased from sucks. In order to drive high-margin cross-sell and upsells, which is high margins since you've already paid to acquire the customer, you need to have happy customers, which means investing significantly in support and customer success. Churn and retention. One of the core metrics for customer success is churn, especially for subscription services that rely on customer retention to grow. Churn rate can be calculated two ways. Revenue churn is the percent of your revenue you've kept over a specific time period. For example, if you had $100,000 of monthly recurring revenue, or MMR, in January, and $80,000 of MMR in February, your churn rate would be the product of subtracting $100,000 from $80,000 and dividing that by $100,000. Basically, 20% of your monthly recurring revenue from last month isn't going to recur this month since it left. You can do the same calculation on an annual basis for annual recurring revenue, or ARR. The second kind of churn is customer churn, or logo churn. This is the same calculation, but instead of taking the revenue value, you count the number of customers. So if we go back to our example from earlier, that $100,000 in revenue might be 100 customers, and 10 customers left. Your logo churn would be 10%. Churn is important to know because every dollar you churn out is a dollar of new business you need to go and find. If your churn gets too high, it becomes incredibly difficult to grow. You can also use churn to help with your segmentation. Here's an example. In segment A, you have a churn rate, which is unsubscribers per month, of 3%. And in segment B, your churn rate is 6%. Here you can see that segment B has a higher churn rate, with 6% of subscribers abandoning the service each month. It could be that segment B is just not an ideal customer target group, or it could be that you need to make some tweaks to keep them happy and keep them coming back. Data can't really tell you what to do. It needs to be interpreted in the context of your overall company vision to decide which action to take. The solution here is not obvious at all. All we know is that Group B is more likely to unsubscribe than is Group A. Customer Lifetime Value, LTV. Closely related to churn is Customer Lifetime Value, or LTV. Customer Lifetime Value is a measure of how valuable a customer is to your company. It's actually somewhat complicated to calculate, so I'm going to start with a simplified approach. Year 1, profit is $1. Year 2, profit is $2. Year 3, profit is $2. Year 4, profit is $0. This table shows the profit coming from a particular customer in each year since he became a customer. You can see that he stopped becoming a customer in year 4, hence the $0 in profit, So the lifetime of the customer is 3 years. The lifetime value can be calculated by adding up the profit for those 3 years. $1 plus $2 plus $2 equals $5. The customer lifetime value is thus $5. This is a simple formula. A more sophisticated method touches on the world of finance. This more elaborate formula accounts for churn rates, the cost of customer acquisition, and something called the discount rate. Let me explain. In years 2 and 3, you can see that profit was $2. But because of the time value of money, money today is worth more than money tomorrow, so that $2 in year 2 is actually worth more than $2 in year 3. That's because $2 in year 2 could have been invested and appreciated for an entire year. But there are other factors here besides the time of value. There's also risk and uncertainty associated with future profits that don't apply to the present. Lifetime value is easier to calculate if your company relies heavily on customer relationship management software, or CRM. If your company doesn't use CRM, then you may need to estimate lifetime value based on sampling customers through market research. What you may discover is that some of your customers are actually losing you money. You should try your best as a marketer to avoid these types of customers. If they abandon you, do not send them discounts or offers to return. Try to focus your communications on the most profitable segments. Closely connected to lifetime value are these other metrics. ARPU, average revenue per user. Be careful with this metric because averages can be deceiving. Often the bulk of your revenue comes from a tiny group of people. In that case, an average would be a misleading figure. ARPPU, average revenue per paying user. In some markets, such as free-to-play gaming, the bulk of people may pay nothing. That's why the average revenue per paying user may be more meaningful. The reason we're talking about these metrics here is that they're incredibly important for customer success. At the very least, customer success, as part of the go-to-market team, has the responsibility of reducing or eliminating churn. Increasingly, they're also responsible for growing accounts, increasing ARPU, ARPPU, and LTV. If you're relying heavily on expansion to reach your goals, you need to watch these metrics like a hawk. Assembling your team. For a B2B business to deliver a cohesive go-to-market strategy, they need to have marketing, sales, and customer success in place. Marketing is needed to identify the market opportunity that the go-to-market team is going to exploit. Basically, they answer the question, where are we going to market and with what? For the most part, the task of answering this question is owned by product marketing. But marketing is also needed to inform and convince people to buy in a low ACV environment or talk sales in a high ACV environment. This task is owned by demand generation. Sales is needed to turn leads into closed business. Essentially, sales is responsible for actually taking the product or service and getting it into the hands of customers. And customer success is needed to delight customers so they stick around for a long time. Customer success also needs to keep customers happy so that they can be upsold more of the same, or cross-sold additional products, while also telling the world how great you are. Once these 3 parts are in place, you have what Jim Collins in his book Good to Great has called the flywheel. Essentially, marketing acquires customers, sales closes them, and customer success delights them, which in turn drives acquisition, sales, and delight onwards and onwards as you take over your chosen marketplace. Chapter Summary Questions. Have you assembled your complete go-to-market team, including marketing, sales, and customer success? Are clear roles, expectations, and SLAs defined across the go-to-market team? Have you calculated LTV and churn and linked both figures back to your overall business goal so you know the benchmark values for both?
The main thing to remember from this section is that go-to-market success is fundamentally cross-functional. That means you need to empower the sales team, the product team, and the customer success managers. It also means you need to take responsibility for things you don't necessarily have control over. That requires political skills to get buy-in and execution from other departments.